Ladies and gentlemen, there are moments in life when injustice seems to reign supreme, when those who deceive, manipulate, and harm others appear to walk away unscathed, when the weight of your suffering feels unbearable, and the world seems indifferent to your pain. But I assure you, there is a hidden order within this chaos. Throughout history, across cultures, and within the depths of human experience, there is an undeniable truth. What is sown will eventually be reaped. Those who act without conscience, who build their success on deception, and who thrive on the suffering of others are not immune to consequence. Their downfall is not always immediate, but it is inevitable. Your suffering, however painful, is not in vain. It is the crucible in which resilience is forged, the test that reveals character, and the process through which true strength is born. The ones who have harmed you may seem untouchable today, but they are laying the foundation for their own collapse. No one can outrun the weight of their actions indefinitely. The universe does not operate on human timelines, nor does justice always manifest in ways we expect. But rest assured, the dishonest will be caught in their own web. The arrogant will stumble over their own pride, and the cruel will be consumed by the very darkness they once wielded. Your role is not to seek revenge, but to rise above, to grow, and to embody the very qualities that those who harmed you lack: strength, wisdom, and integrity. Do not let your suffering embitter you, let it refine you. Do not let your pain make you vengeful, let it make you wise. Because in the end, karma does not require your intervention, only your patience. And when the time comes, the weight of their own actions will be far heavier than anything you could ever impose. The moral balance of the universe. The idea that the universe maintains a moral balance is a concept deeply embedded in philosophy, religion, and even modern psychology. It is the principle that actions, good or bad, have consequences that unfold over time, often in ways that are difficult to predict. While life may seem unfair in the short term, there is an underlying structure to existence that ensures justice is ultimately served. At first glance, it may appear that those who act dishonorably, those who manipulate, deceive, or harm others, prosper without consequence. Corrupt individuals rise to power, dishonest people accumulate wealth, and those who exploit others sometimes seem to live without remorse. This can be frustrating and disheartening, leading many to believe that morality is irrelevant, that virtue is a burden, and that fairness is a mere illusion. However, this perspective is short-sighted. Human beings do not exist in isolation. Our actions ripple through our relationships, our communities, and the world at large. When someone engages in wrongdoing, they are not merely harming others, they are poisoning the very foundation upon which their own life is built. Lies lead to more lies, cruelty fosters resentment, and exploitation breeds instability. Over time, the weight of these negative actions accumulate, creating an inevitable reckoning. The dishonest may gain material wealth, but they lose trust. The manipulative may acquire power, but they are surrounded by people waiting for their downfall. The cruel may dominate, but they live in fear of retaliation. The life built on deception and harm is inherently unstable, and no one escapes the consequences of their own actions forever. This is where the concept of karma, or moral causality, comes into play. While karma is often thought of in a mystical or religious sense, it can also be understood in a purely psychological and social framework. A person who consistently acts unethically, cultivates enemies, damages relationships, and deteriorates their own integrity. Even if they evade external punishment, they cannot escape the internal consequences: guilt, anxiety, paranoia, or an increasing disconnect from reality. In contrast, those who endure suffering without succumbing to bitterness or vengefulness develop strength, resilience, and a clarity of purpose that ultimately positions them for greater success. And this is not to say that justice always unfolds in ways that are immediate or easily observable. Sometimes we must have patience. The moral balance of the universe does not operate on our preferred timeline, nor does it always manifest in direct, obvious ways. But history has shown, time and time again, that no one can escape the consequences of their actions forever. Tyrants fall, deceivers are exposed, and those who harm others often face ruin in the most unexpected ways. Even if they never face public disgrace, they must live within the psychological torment they have created for themselves. For those who have suffered injustice, this understanding is crucial. It is easy to become consumed by thoughts of revenge, to obsess over how the wrongdoers will face retribution. However, true strength lies in letting go of that burden. The best response to suffering is not vengeance, but growth. Rather than seeking to punish those who have wronged us, we should focus on elevating ourselves, developing our character, refining our wisdom, and becoming the kind of person who thrives despite adversity. The moral balance of the universe ensures that everyone reaps what they sow. Your suffering is not meaningless. It is the prelude to justice. Those who act without conscience will face their reckoning, whether through external consequences or the inescapable reality of their own self-destruction. Meanwhile, those who endure suffering with integrity will emerge stronger, wiser, and ultimately victorious. The key is to trust in the process, knowing that while injustice may seem to flourish in the short term, it cannot stand the test of time. The growth in suffering. Suffering is an inescapable part of life. No human being, regardless of wealth, power, or privilege, can completely avoid pain, loss, and hardship. But suffering, as cruel as it may seem, is not meaningless. It is a test, a refining fire that has the potential to transform those who endure it into something stronger, wiser, and more resilient. It is natural to ask, why do I have to suffer? Or why do bad things happen to good people? These are questions as old as human civilization itself. Many people assume suffering is purely negative, something to be avoided at all costs. They view it as a sign that the universe is unjust or that they are somehow unworthy of happiness. However, this perspective fails to recognize an essential truth. Suffering is not just a burden, it is an opportunity. Throughout history, the most remarkable individuals have been those who endured great suffering and emerged stronger. Every great leader, philosopher, and thinker has faced trials that shaped their character. The strongest people are not those who have lived in comfort, but those who have faced adversity head-on and refused to be broken by it. When life becomes difficult, when injustice strikes, and when betrayal wounds you, you are given a choice. You can allow the pain to consume you, making you bitter and resentful, or you can use it as fuel for transformation. Pain has a way of revealing who we truly are. It strips away illusions, forcing us to confront our weaknesses and redefine our strengths. Many of the most valuable qualities in a person, wisdom, patience, discipline, and compassion, are not developed in times of ease, but through hardship. A person who has never suffered may live a comfortable life, but they will lack depth, perspective, and the kind of strength that only experience can provide. This does not mean suffering should be sought out, or that it is something to be celebrated for its own sake. Rather, it should be understood as an unavoidable reality that, if handled correctly, can become the foundation for personal growth. The key lies in how we respond to suffering. If we resist it, refusing to accept its lessons, we become trapped in resentment. But if we embrace it with the mindset of learning and growth, it becomes a path to a higher version of ourselves. There is also a deeper aspect to suffering, one that ties into justice and the natural order of the world. Often, Suffering comes not from random misfortune, but from the actions of others. People betray, deceive, and harm each other, often without facing immediate consequences. It may seem like those who inflict suffering get away unscathed, while the innocent bear the burden. But this is an illusion. What they fail to realize is that their cruelty does not merely harm their victims, it sets the stage for their own downfall. Meanwhile, the one who suffers and endures gains something invaluable: wisdom, strength, and the kind of resilience that cannot be taken away. In many ways, suffering is the first stage of justice. The pain you endure today is not the end of the story. It is a prelude, a process through which you grow, while those who caused it unknowingly create the conditions for their own downfall. They may believe they have won, that they have escaped without consequence, but they have only begun a slow descent into their own reckoning. The real power lies in what you do with your suffering. If you allow it to consume you, it can destroy you. But if you choose to rise above it, to transform it into strength, you gain something that cannot be taken away. And in the end, those who inflicted pain will be left to face the consequences of their actions, while you will emerge stronger, wiser, and ready to claim a future that is no longer shaped by their cruelty, but by your resilience. The self-destruction of the malevolent. One of the great illusions of life is that those who act with malice, deception, and cruelty can thrive indefinitely. At times it may seem like manipulative people gain influence, like dishonest individuals prosper, or like those who harm others escape consequences. This illusion has led many to despair, questioning whether morality matters at all. But history, psychology, and even our own observations of human nature reveal a deeper truth. Malevolence is ultimately self-destructive. People who build their lives on cruelty and deceit are playing a dangerous game, one that cannot be sustained. Every lie told must be maintained with another lie. Every betrayal breeds distrust. Every unjust action plants the seed of eventual collapse. The malevolent may believe they are untouchable, but they are, in reality, constructing the very conditions that will lead to their own downfall. One of the fundamental reasons for this is that unethical behavior corrodes a person from within. A dishonest person does not just deceive others, they deceive themselves. The more lies they tell, the more they distort their perception of reality. Eventually, their view of the world becomes so disconnected from truth that they make fatal mistakes. They assume they are invincible, that no one will ever catch on, that they can continue their manipulations forever, but reality does not bend to their delusions forever. Eventually, the truth emerges, and when it does, their house of cards collapses. Similarly, those who exploit and harm others create enemies, even if those enemies remain silent at first. Betrayal fosters resentment, injustice builds tension. People may tolerate cruelty for a time, but human nature is wired for justice, and when the opportunity for retribution arises, it is often swift and severe. We see this throughout history. Tyrants who rule through fear eventually fall, corrupt leaders face exposure, and even the most cunning manipulators eventually run out of people to deceive. The patience of those they have wronged turns into action, and their downfall is often far worse than they ever imagined. But the most significant punishment for the malevolent is not always external, it is internal. A person who lives in deception cannot experience true peace. They must always be calculating, always watching their back, always fearing exposure. This leads to a life of paranoia, isolation, and ultimately self-destruction. Even if they appear to be successful on the outside, their inner world is a storm of anxiety and dissatisfaction. They may have power, but they have no real relationships. They may have wealth, but they feel no true fulfillment. They may appear strong, but their foundation is crumbling beneath them. Contrast this with the person who suffers yet maintains their integrity. While the malevolent create a future of chaos for themselves, the person who endures suffering with resilience builds a foundation of strength. Every injustice they face, every hardship they overcome, is another brick in a fortress that will outlast the storms of life. They do not have to live in fear of exposure because they have nothing to hide. They do not have to manipulate others because their relationships are built on trust. They may experience suffering, but they grow because of it rather than being destroyed by their own actions. This is why patience is so crucial. When you have been wronged, it is easy to want immediate justice. It is tempting to believe that the only way to make things right is to take matters into your own hands. But those who act with malice are already walking toward their own destruction. You do not need to chase them down. They will arrive there on their own. The best thing you can do is focus on your own growth, knowing that the forces they have set in motion will eventually turn against them. The malevolent do not escape justice. They carry their punishment within them, and sooner or later it consumes them. Their suffering will be far worse than anything you could ever impose, because it is the result of their own doing. Meanwhile, those who endure suffering with integrity will emerge stronger, while those who inflict harm will collapse under the weight of their own cruelty. The power of responsibility. One of the greatest traps a person can fall into after experiencing suffering or injustice is the mindset of victimhood. When you have been wronged, when life has treated you unfairly, it is natural to feel anger, resentment, and even a desire for revenge. But these emotions, if left unchecked, can become chains that keep you trapped in the very suffering you wish to escape. The real key to overcoming hardship is not vengeance, it is responsibility. Responsibility is a concept that many people misunderstand. It does not mean taking the blame for what has happened to you. It does not mean excusing those who have wronged you. What it means is taking ownership of what happens next. You cannot control the actions of others. You cannot always prevent suffering from coming into your life, but you can control your response. And that response determines your future. There is a harsh truth that many people do not want to hear. No one is coming to save you. The people who harmed you may never apologize. Justice may not arrive in the way you expect. The world will not stop to fix everything that has been broken. But that does not mean you are powerless. In fact, the moment you accept full responsibility for your life, regardless of what has happened, you take back your power. You shift from being a passive sufferer to an active creator of your future. The danger of focusing on revenge is that it keeps your attention on the past. When you are consumed by thoughts of making others suffer, you are still allowing them to control you. Your energy, your thoughts, and your emotions are all tied to them, rather than being directed toward your own growth. But when you choose responsibility, you break free. You redirect that energy toward building yourself into someone who no longer has to be affected by their cruelty. History is filled with examples of individuals who turned their suffering into strength, those who endured betrayal, injustice, or hardship but refused to let it define them. Instead of seeking revenge, they sought wisdom. Instead of dwelling in resentment, they built something greater. They did not waste time hoping their enemies would fall. They spent their time ensuring they would rise. But responsibility goes even deeper than personal success. It is also a path to justice. The strongest form of justice is not to punish those who harmed you. It is to become so powerful, so wise, and so resilient that they no longer have any hold over you. When you grow beyond the need for revenge, when you reach a level where their actions can no longer hurt you, you have already won. Meanwhile, they are left to deal with the consequences of their own choices. This does not mean you should allow injustice to continue unchecked. It does not mean you should be passive in the face of wrongdoing. It simply means that your primary focus should be on your own transformation rather than on tearing others down. True justice is not about making others suffer. It is about ensuring they no longer have the ability to harm you or anyone else. Responsibility is the path to freedom. The moment you stop waiting for others to make things right and take control of your own life, you become unstoppable. No matter how much suffering you have endured, no matter how unfairly you have been treated, you still have the power to shape your future. And that is a power far greater than any revenge could ever provide. Those who choose responsibility rise, while those who seek to harm others are eventually consumed by their own actions. The world is shaped not by those who dwell in the past, but by those who take ownership of the present and build something greater. The choice is always yours. Will you remain trapped in resentment, or will you take responsibility and transform your suffering into strength? The triumph of order over chaos. Throughout human history, there has been a constant struggle between two forces, order and chaos. These forces are not just abstract concepts, but fundamental aspects of existence that play out in every part of life, from personal struggles to societal conflicts. Chaos is suffering, deception, and destruction, while order is discipline, truth, and justice. Those who seek to harm others are agents of chaos, whether they realize it or not. But in the end, chaos is unsustainable. It always collapses under its own weight. Order, when cultivated with integrity and wisdom, always triumphs. The experience of suffering often feels like being thrown into chaos. You may have built your life on trust, discipline, and morality, yet someone else's actions suddenly throw you into turmoil. A betrayal, a deception, or an injustice can feel like an earthquake that shatters everything you once believed in. It can make the world seem cruel and indifferent, as though morality is an illusion, and that only those who manipulate and exploit others succeed. This is where many people lose hope. They see those who operate in dishonesty and malice prospering, while good people seem to suffer without consequence. But this perspective is limited. It is only looking at a single moment in time, not the full arc of justice that plays out over a lifetime. Chaos, by its nature, is unstable. Those who build their lives upon it, through lies, betrayal, and injustice, do not create anything solid or lasting. They may rise quickly, gaining power, wealth, or influence through deceit, but their foundation is weak. A person who manipulates others has no real allies, only temporary followers who will turn on them the moment it benefits them. A person who deceives others eventually loses the ability to distinguish between truth and falsehood themselves, leading them to make critical mistakes. A person who seeks power through intimidation is constantly paranoid, knowing that the same fear they instill in others will one day be turned against them. Look at history. Tyrants, corrupt leaders, and deceivers often seem invincible at their peak, but how many of them truly lasted? How many built legacies that endured? The ones who relied on lies were eventually exposed. The ones who ruled through fear were eventually overthrown. The ones who betrayed others eventually found themselves alone and powerless. Even those who seemed to get away with it often lived lives of paranoia and emptiness, haunted by the consequences of their own actions. The very chaos they created eventually consumed them. In contrast, order is sustainable. A person who builds their life on truth does not have to live in fear of exposure. A person who cultivates discipline and integrity does not have to worry about their foundation crumbling. A person who seeks justice rather than vengeance creates something that lasts, something that can withstand the storms of life. This is why patience is so important. Justice is rarely immediate. The path of order takes longer to build, but in the end, it is the only path that does not lead to destruction. This is the lesson that suffering teaches. When you are thrown into chaos, you are given a choice. Will you allow it to consume you, or will you use it as a tool to create something stronger? Many people who suffer injustice are tempted to respond with more chaos. They want revenge. They want to strike back with the same cruelty that was used against them. But this only perpetuates the cycle. It turns them into the very thing they despise. The true path forward is to take the suffering, the pain, the injustice, and transform it into wisdom, strength, and discipline. Discipline is one of the greatest weapons against chaos. The people who act with malice and deception are often ruled by impulse. They seek immediate gratification, quick gains, and short-term victories. But discipline is about playing the long game. It is about building something that lasts, something that cannot be easily torn down. When you choose discipline over chaos, you are no longer at the mercy of your emotions or the actions of others. You become stronger than those who harmed you because you are not reacting, you are creating. Truth is another force that ultimately triumphs over chaos. Lies can be effective in the short term, but they are like a house built on sand. Eventually, the foundation gives way. A person who speaks the truth, even when it is difficult, builds credibility over time. The people who seek to manipulate and deceive may win for a while, but in the long run they lose everything because they have no real stability. Truth is like a lighthouse in the storm. It does not waver, and those who follow it will always find solid ground. Justice, though often delayed, is inevitable. Many people assume that justice means immediate punishment for wrongdoers, but real justice is much deeper. It is not always about external consequences. It is about internal reckoning. A person who acts unjustly may not always be caught by the law, but they cannot escape themselves. They must live with the paranoia, the emptiness, and the instability they have created. Meanwhile, those who endure suffering with integrity become stronger, wiser, and more resilient. This is why order always triumphs over chaos, because chaos is self-destructive, while order builds something that lasts. The suffering you experience is not meaningless. It is the process through which you are being refined, made stronger, and prepared for something greater. Those who wronged you are walking toward their own collapse, whether they realize it or not. The best thing you can do is not to fall into their game. Do not let their chaos pull you down. Instead, rise above it. Build something better. When you choose discipline over recklessness, when you choose truth over deception, when you choose responsibility over victimhood, you step onto the path of order. And while that path may be longer and more difficult, it is the only one that leads to real strength, real justice, and real victory. The suffering you endure today is not the end of your story. It is a test, a trial that, if faced with integrity, will shape you into something far greater than those who sought to harm you. Chaos may seem powerful in the moment, but it always collapses under its own weight. Order, truth, and discipline will outlast it. And when the dust settles, those who chose the path of integrity will be the ones left standing.